It was 6:12 p.m. when Joseph decided to make his point. The room was quiet in that tight, uncomfortable way that only happens in executive meetings. 12 of us sat around a long glass table on the 14th floor. Screens were still glowing. Half-finished coffees sat cold. Most people had already been there for over 10 hours. And then Joseph leaned forward, folded his hands, and looked straight at me. "Ethan," he said, calm and clean like he practiced it, "you've been here 17 years, but you still think like a technician, not leadership." A few people smiled. Not loud, not obvious, just enough. I didn't say anything. I remember the exact angle of the light reflecting off the table. I remember the CEO sitting at the head, arms crossed, saying nothing. I remember the way Joseph held eye contact like he was waiting for me to defend myself or break. I didn't either. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I was 48 years old that year. Senior infrastructure architect. 17 years in the same company. Long enough to build things people forgot I built. Joseph kept going. "We're trying to move forward," he said. "Automation, scalable systems, not manual oversight, not dependency on individuals." He didn't say my name again, but he didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew what he meant. I sat back in my chair and nodded once. Not agreement, just acknowledgement, like I'd heard it, because I had. It wasn't the first time, but this was the first time he said it in front of everyone that mattered. There's a difference between being ignored quietly and being reduced publicly. One you can manage. The other stays with you. I looked around the table. People avoided my eyes. A few typed notes that didn't matter. One of the younger managers, someone I'd trained 3 years earlier, kept his focus locked on his laptop like he didn't want to be seen reacting. Joseph shifted the conversation back to slides and projections like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just drawn a line through 17 years of work in a single sentence. And the CEO let him. That part mattered more than anything Joseph said. Because silence at the top isn't neutral. It's approval. I didn't interrupt. I didn't push back. I didn't explain what I actually did or why half the systems in that building still relied on decisions no automation could handle. I stayed quiet. That was my mistake. Or maybe it was the moment everything started to become clear. My phone buzzed once against the table. A soft vibration. Then again. I glanced down. System alert. Minor. Nothing urgent. Just a small flag in one of the back-end processes. Something most people in that room wouldn't even recognize. I dismissed it. Joseph was talking about future-ready architecture now. Clean words. Good slides. The kind of language that sounds right when you don't have to carry the consequences. I checked my phone again. Another alert. Same system. Slight variation. Still minor. Still nothing they would understand. I turned the screen face down and let it sit. Because the truth was, I already knew what those alerts meant. Not the surface-level message. The deeper pattern. The kind of pattern you only see after years of watching how things actually behave under pressure. I looked back up at Joseph. He was confident. Smooth. The kind of confidence that comes from believing you understand something because it looks organized on paper. He didn't know what held the edges together. He didn't know where the system bent before it broke. And more importantly, he didn't know that I did. The meeting ran another 40 minutes. Decisions were made. Timelines were set. Ownership was reassigned in ways that looked clean on slides, but ignored the way things actually worked. No one asked me anything. No one needed to. They had already decided what I was. Reliable. Technical. Replaceable. At 7:03 p.m., the meeting ended. Chairs slid back. Conversations picked up in low tones. People moved fast, like they always do after something uncomfortable. I stayed seated for a moment longer. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. Same system. Slightly louder now. I picked it up, looked at the screen, and then locked it without responding. Not yet. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out of the room without saying a word. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do in a moment like that is nothing. Not because you don't have an answer, but because you already know they're not ready to hear it. And what happens next will make it impossible to ignore. I didn't start out invisible. 17 years earlier, when I first walked into that building, I was the guy they called when things broke. Back then, the company was smaller, faster, less polished. Problems didn't sit in meetings. They showed up in real time. Systems failed, clients called, and someone had to fix it before the damage spread. That someone was usually me. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I wasn't the loudest person in the room. I wasn't the one making presentations or building slide decks. I was the one sitting behind the scenes, watching how everything connected. I learned the systems the way most people don't. Not from documentation, not from training sessions, from failure, from nights when something went down and there was no guide, no process, no one to escalate to, just a broken system and a clock moving too fast. I figured out how things really worked. And over time, I started building the parts no one else wanted to touch. The parts that didn't look impressive. The parts that didn't get you promoted. But the parts that kept everything stable. Piece by piece, I built layers into the infrastructure. Not flashy changes. Quiet ones. Safeguards. Decision points. Small controls that caught problems before they turned into outages. Most of them didn't even have names. They were just there, working. That's the thing about systems like that. When they work, no one notices. When they fail, everyone panics. Over the years, leadership changed. New executives came in, people with strong resumes, good schools, clean language. They talked about scale, growth, transformation. They also talked about simplification. And on the surface, that sounded right. Because complex systems are hard to explain. And if you can't explain something in a clean sentence, it starts to look unnecessary. That's where things began to shift. People like me, we didn't present well. We didn't package our work into neat stories. We just made sure things didn't break. I trained a lot of people during those years. Smart people, fast learners, good with tools and frameworks. Some of them moved up quickly, became managers, directors. Eventually, they sat in rooms I wasn't invited to anymore. I didn't resent them, at least not at first, because I knew something they didn't. They understood the surface. I understood the weight underneath. There's a difference between knowing how to run a system and knowing how it fails. One gets you promoted. The other keeps the company alive. My salary leveled out around year 10. 87,000, then 92, then 95. Small increases. Nothing dramatic. Meanwhile, I watched people I trained move past me. One of them crossed 140 in under 5 years. Another got a VP track offer before he turned 35. I stayed where I was. Not because I couldn't move, but because every time I considered it, there was another system to stabilize. Another gap to close. Another problem no one else could fully see. And somewhere along the way, I made a decision without saying it out loud. I chose stability over visibility. I chose being necessary over being recognized. It worked for a while, because the company depended on things they didn't fully understand. And those things depended on me. There were processes, critical ones, that weren't fully automated. Not because we didn't try, but because full automation assumed perfect data, perfect timing, perfect conditions. Real systems don't work like that. There are moments where something looks right on paper, but wrong in reality. Moments where a decision has to be made based on experience, not logic. That's where I came in. Small adjustments, manual overrides, quiet corrections. Most people never saw them. They just saw that things worked. And over time, that became the expectation, that everything would always work, no matter what changed, no matter who was in charge, no matter how many layers got added on top. That kind of expectation, it builds slowly, and it rests on things no one writes down. I knew where the weak points were. I knew which systems could handle pressure, and which ones only looked stable because someone was watching them closely. I also knew what would happen if that attention disappeared. Not instantly, not in a dramatic way, but gradually, layer by layer. The kind of failure that doesn't start with alarms. It starts with small signals. Ignored ones. Dismissed ones. The kind I saw on my phone that night. But by then, the company had already started to believe a different story. A cleaner one. A simpler one. One where everything important was documented, automated, and replaceable. Including me. And that belief was about to be tested in a way none of them were prepared for. Joseph joined in late March. He came in with the kind of introduction that makes people pay attention. Top MBA, big consulting firm, led 2 successful transformations before this. The email announcement called him a forward-thinking leader focused on scalable innovation. I read it once and closed it. I'd seen that kind of language before. It usually meant change was coming fast and understanding would come later, if it came at all. The first few weeks were quiet. Joseph sat in meetings, asked clean questions, listened more than he spoke. People liked that. It felt respectful, thoughtful. But I noticed something else. He didn't ask how things actually worked under pressure. He asked how they were supposed to work. There's a difference. By the second month, the tone shifted. He started using words like dependency risk and single points of failure. On paper, he wasn't wrong. Any system tied too closely to one person is fragile. But the way he framed it, it wasn't about strengthening the system. It was about removing the person, me. In one meeting, he pulled up a diagram of our core infrastructure. Clean lines, boxes, arrows. Everything looked simple. This, he said, pointing at a section I had built years ago, should be fully automated by now. Why are we still relying on manual oversight here? I answer calmly, because the data feeding that layer isn't consistent. Automation works until it doesn't. When it fails fast. He nodded like he understood. Then he moved on. A week later, he used the same diagram to explain why that exact section needed to be modernized. That's when I knew. He wasn't ignoring what I said. He was choosing not to use it. From there, decisions started happening faster. Project got reassigned. Processes got redefined. Teams got restructured around what looked efficient instead of what actually worked. And then came the moment that made it clear. Joseph called a smaller meeting. Just a few of us. Mid-level managers. Technical leads. He introduced a new oversight model. We're going to centralize system control, he said. Reduce manual touchpoints. Increase visibility. Make this scalable. Then he looked at me. Ethan, I'd like you to document everything in your current scope. Full knowledge transfer. We'll transition oversight to Kevin. Kevin. I knew the name before he finished the sentence. Kevin Liu. 32. Sharp. Fast. Ambitious. I trained him myself. 3 years earlier, he sat next to me asking questions about how the system handled edge cases. I showed him what I could. He learned quickly. I respected that. But he didn't have the years. He hadn't seen the failures I had. He hadn't watched the system bend under pressure and barely hold. And now, he was being handed control. I didn't argue. What timeline? I asked. Joseph smiled slightly. 4 weeks should be enough. 4 weeks to transfer 17 years of lived knowledge into documents. 4 weeks to explain decisions that weren't written down because they couldn't be. 4 weeks to make something complex look simple enough for someone else to manage. I nodded. Understood. Kevin glanced at me. Not arrogant. Not smug. Just uncertain. He knew what this meant. But he also knew what saying no would cost him. After the meeting, he caught up to me in the hallway. Ethan, he said, lowering his voice, I'll need your help on this. You'll get what's documented, I said. He hesitated. That's not really the same thing. I looked at him for a moment. No, I said, it's not. Then I walked away. Over the next few weeks, I did exactly what they asked. I documented processes. I outlined system flows. I created clean explanations for things that had never been written down before. But there were gaps. Not intentional, just real. Because some things don't live in documents. They live in experience. They live in moments when something feels off, even if the data says it's fine. They live in judgment. And judgment isn't something you could transfer in a file. I started noticing small changes as Kevin took over parts of the system. Nothing dramatic. Just slight differences in how decisions were handled. Things that would have triggered a manual check before, now passed automatically. Edge cases that used to get flagged now move through without pause. It all looked efficient, cleaner, faster, but also thinner, like a structure that's been simplified just enough to lose its strength. I mentioned it once, quietly. Kevin nodded, said he'd review it. Joseph heard about it. In the next meeting, he framed it differently. Resistance to change is normal, he said, glancing in my direction. But we have to move forward. Resistance. That's what my experience had become. Not insight, not caution, resistance. So I stopped pushing. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something they didn't. The system was starting to drift. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to cause immediate damage, but enough to change how it would respond under stress. And stress always comes. You just don't get to choose when. People think silence is weakness. Most of the time, it isn't. Sometimes it's a decision. I was 48 years old when all of this was happening. Old enough to know how quickly things can change. Young enough to know I still had responsibilities I couldn't ignore. I had a mortgage, not a small one, the kind that doesn't disappear just because your job does. My daughter was in her second year at university. Tuition, housing, everything that comes with it. She worked hard to get there. I wasn't about to put that at risk because I wanted to prove a point at work. My wife didn't say much about what was happening, but she could see it. The late nights, the quiet dinners, the way I'd sit with my phone in my hand, not looking at anything, just thinking. "You okay?" she asked me once. "Yeah," I said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either, because what I was feeling wasn't panic. It was clarity. I could see exactly what was happening. I could see where the decisions were leading, and I could also see something else. They weren't going to listen. Not now. Not while everything still looked like it was working. That's the problem with systems that hold together quietly. They create confidence. False confidence. And that confidence makes people ignore the very things keeping it stable. I had moments where I could have pushed harder. Meetings where I could have challenged Joseph directly. Emails I could have written, copying the CEO, laying out the risks in plain terms. I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd already seen how those moments played out. They don't hear you. They label you. Difficult. Resistant. Not aligned. And once that label sticks, everything you say after that gets filtered through it. So I made a different decision. I stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own assumptions. I did my job, exactly as defined. Nothing more, nothing less. If something was in my scope, I handled it. If it wasn't, I let it pass. No extra corrections. No quiet fixes. No stepping in before something became visible. It wasn't an emotional reaction. It was a boundary. One I should have set years earlier. Kevin took over more control each week. I answered his questions when he asked. I shared what was written, but I didn't fill in the gaps unless he specifically pushed for it. Most of the time, he didn't, because from his perspective, things were working. The dashboards looked clean. The reports showed stability. The alerts stayed low. Everything pointed to success. That's how systems fail. Not with noise, with silence. There were moments when I saw small issues forming. Minor inconsistencies, timing mismatches, data flowing through paths that weren't designed to handle certain conditions. Before, I would have stepped in immediately, adjusted something, slowed something down, added a manual check. Now, I watched, not because I wanted failure, but because I understood something had to become visible before it could be taken seriously. You can't explain risk to someone who hasn't felt it. They have to see it. I remember one evening, sitting at my desk, looking at a sequence of transactions that didn't line up perfectly. Nothing critical. Not yet. But it was the kind of thing that, under pressure, could expand. I hovered over the system controls for a second. Then I pulled my hand back, closed the window, and went home. That was the moment. The real turning point. Not the meeting where Joseph spoke. Not the reassignment. But that quiet decision. To stop being the invisible layer that corrected everything before anyone else noticed. From that point on, I became exactly what they thought I was. A technician. Someone who followed defined tasks. Nothing more. And without that extra layer, the system didn't break right away. It never does. It held. For a while. But underneath, the structure was changing. Small shifts. Tiny gaps. The kind you don't see until they connect. Systems don't fail all at once. They fail in layers. And once those layers start to give, there's no clean way to stop it. Only a moment, when everything finally shows itself. I woke up at 3:04 a.m. to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. Not a call. A series of alerts. Short. Sharp. Repeating. I didn't move right away. I just lay there for a second, staring at the ceiling, listening to the pattern. I already knew what kind of alert it was. After enough years, you don't need to read them to understand the tone. Still, I reached over, picked up the phone, and unlocked the screen. 3 missed alerts. Then 4 more came in while I was looking. Same system, same layer. The one Joseph said should be fully automated. I sat up slowly, resting my back against the headboard. My wife shifted beside me, but didn't wake. I opened the dashboard. At first glance, everything looked almost normal. Traffic was still moving. No full outage. No hard stop. But the timing was off. A few processes were lagging behind where they should have been. Not by much. Seconds at first, then longer. I knew that pattern. It meant the system wasn't failing cleanly. It was slipping. And slipping systems are harder to fix than broken ones. I tapped into the deeper logs. Followed the path I'd built years ago. Watched how data moved from one layer to the next. That's when I saw it. A decision loop had started to misfire. Not a crash. Not an error. Just a wrong call repeating. One layer made a choice based on incomplete data. That choice triggered another process downstream. That process fed back into the first one with a delay. A loop. Small at first, then growing. If it kept going, it would start to stack. And once it stacked far enough, everything would slow down. Then stall. Then break in places no one would expect. I knew exactly where to step in. There was a manual override. A quiet control point. Something I had added years ago after a similar pattern showed up under pressure. Most people didn't even know it existed. I could fix it in under 10 minutes. Maybe less. I hovered over the control. My thumb paused, and for the first time in 17 years, I didn't act. I leaned back against the headboard again and just watched. The alerts kept coming. Not louder, just more frequent. The system was still holding. Barely. I opened the message thread for the operations team. Nothing yet. They hadn't seen it. Or they had and didn't understand what it meant. A minute later, a message came through. Seeing some delay in processing. Anyone else? Another one followed. Yeah, minor lag. Monitoring. I didn't type anything. I set the phone down on my chest and closed my eyes for a second. Not to sleep, just to think. This wasn't revenge. It didn't feel like that. It felt inevitable. Like watching something you knew would happen finally begin. Another alert. Then another. I picked the phone back up. Now the delays were spreading to adjacent systems. Not full failures. Just slow responses. Small inconsistencies. The kind that confuse people at first. Because nothing is clearly broken. It just doesn't feel right. I knew what the next stage would look like. More loops. More stacking. Then mismatches between systems that used to stay in sync. That's when people start asking questions. That's when meetings get called. I could still stop it. Even now, it would take longer. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe 30. But it was still contained enough. My phone buzzed again. This time, a direct message. Kevin, Ethan, are you seeing this? I stared at the message for a few seconds. Then I locked the screen. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because I understood something had already changed. If I stepped in now, nothing would be learned. The system would stabilize. The reports would show a brief issue resolved. Joseph would still believe the model worked. Kevin would move on, thinking it was a minor glitch. And I would go back to being the invisible layer that corrected everything before it mattered. I set the phone back on the nightstand. The alerts kept coming. Steady now. Consistent. I turned my head and looked at the ceiling again. There's a point where responsibility shifts. Where doing the right thing for the system is no longer the same as doing the right thing for yourself. I had crossed that point weeks ago. I just hadn't admitted it yet. Another vibration. Another message. I didn't check it. I lay there, awake, listening to the quiet room around me and the silent breakdown happening somewhere far away in a server rack no one in that meeting truly understood. At 3:17 a.m., I finally put the phone face down, closed my eyes, and let it continue. Because I knew this was the moment everything changed. Not with a crash, not with a loud failure, but with a decision. Mine. By 7:10 a.m., the tone had shifted. What started as minor delays turned into widespread inconsistencies. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, when my phone started ringing. Not messages this time. Calls. I let the first one go. Then the second. By the third, I picked up. Ethan, where are you? It was Kevin. His voice was tight. At home. I said, we got a situation. Systems are slowing across multiple layers. We're trying to isolate it, but I saw the alerts, I said calm. There was a pause on the line. Okay, good, he said. Can you jump on a call? I'll be there in 10. I hung up, took a sip of coffee, and looked out the window for a moment. Then I went upstairs, got dressed, and logged in. The emergency call was already full. Voices talking over each other. Different teams trying to explain what they were seeing. Processing times are doubling. Client dashboards are out of sync. We're getting duplicate entries in one region. No, it's not duplication. It's delayed confirmation. Everyone had a piece. No one had the picture. I joined quietly. Didn't say anything at first. I listened. Joseph was on the call. His tone was controlled, but I could hear the edge in it. Let's stay focused, he said. We need root cause, not noise. That's the problem in moments like that. People want a clean answer. But systems like this don't fail cleanly. They fail in layers. Kevin started explaining what they had tried. We restarted the processing queue in Region B. It helped for about 5 minutes. Then the delay came back. Why? Joseph asked. We're not sure yet. Another team spoke up. We're seeing timing mismatches between upstream and downstream systems. Joseph responded quickly, then aligned the timing. Silence for a second. Then someone said, it's not that simple. Of course it wasn't. I muted my mic and leaned back in my chair. They were chasing symptoms, restarting processes, adjusting surface-level settings. None of it touched the actual problem, because they didn't see it. Or maybe I didn't know how to look. After a few minutes, someone said my name. Where's Ethan? Has anyone pulled him in? Kevin answered. He's here. There was a pause. Then Joseph spoke. Ethan, what are you seeing? I unmuted. Delays, I said. Stacking across dependent layers. Cause, he asked. Feedback loop, I said. Triggered by inconsistent data timing. Another pause. You're saying it's a data issue? Joseph asked. No, I said. I'm saying the system is making the wrong decisions because the data isn't arriving the way it expects. That sounds like a data issue, he said. I didn't argue. It's a system response issue, I said. Data just exposes it. He exhaled like he was trying to stay patient. Okay, what's the fix? I could have explained it. I could have walked them through the exact control point, the manual override, the sequence needed to break the loop. Instead, I said, you need to stop the feedback. How, he asked. By interrupting the decision cycle, I said. That's what we're trying to do, Kevin added quickly. But they weren't. Not in the right place. The call went quiet again as they tried to interpret what I said. Then more voices came in. Client support is reporting delays now. We've got 2 major accounts asking for updates. It's spreading. Joseph's tone changed. All right, we need a clear answer. This is impacting clients now. That's when it became real. Not just a system issue, a business issue, a reputation issue. I watched the shift happen in real time. The calm, structured conversation started to fracture. More urgency, less control, people repeating themselves, looking for certainty where there wasn't any. At 7:42 a.m., another voice joined the call. The CEO. Someone explain what's going on, he said. No introduction, no build-up, just direct. And for the first time since this started, no one had a clean answer ready. I stayed quiet for a moment, listening, because now they were finally in the place where the truth couldn't be simplified anymore. And that's when it starts to matter. The line stayed quiet for a few seconds after the CEO spoke. That kind of silence is different. It's not confusion. It's pressure. Everyone on that call knew this had moved beyond internal inconvenience. Clients were involved now. Contracts, reputation, money. Who owns this? The CEO asked. No one answered right away. Then Joseph stepped in. I'm overseeing the infrastructure transition, he said. We're seeing a system-wide delay tied to data timing inconsistencies. The team is working on isolating the root cause. It sounded clean, organized, controlled, but it wasn't the truth. Not the full one. The CEO didn't respond immediately. I could almost picture him on the other end, listening carefully, deciding what mattered and what didn't. Ethan, he said after a moment, you've been quiet. I unmuted my mic. I've been listening, I said. Then tell me what we're dealing with, he said. No anger, no impatience, just direct. I looked at the dashboard on my screen. The pattern was clearer now. The loop had expanded. Multiple layers were feeding into each other. The system wasn't just slipping anymore. It was bending. If you want the short version, I said, the system is making the wrong decisions over and over because it's getting incomplete signals. Joseph cut in. We already covered that. I kept speaking. It's not just data timing, I said. It's how the system reacts when timing is off. Silence again. I went on. Months ago, there were manual checkpoints in place for this exact condition. Small controls that paused decisions when inputs didn't line up. Those were removed during the transition. No one interrupted me this time. They weren't documented clearly, I continued, because they weren't built as features. They were built as safeguards. I paused for a second. They depended on judgment. That word hung in the air longer than anything else I'd said. Joseph didn't speak. Kevin didn't speak. The CEO did. So those safeguards are gone? He asked. Yes, I said. And without them? He asked. The system keeps making decisions it shouldn't, I said. And each one feeds into the next. Another pause. How long until it stops? The CEO asked. It doesn't stop on its own, I said. That was the moment the weight shifted. You could feel it. The difference between a temporary issue and a structural problem. One you wait out. The other, you fix or it gets worse. Why weren't these safeguards part of the new design? The CEO asked. That question wasn't directed at me. Joseph cleared his throat. We were moving toward full automation, he said, reducing manual dependencies, increasing scalability. The CEO didn't respond to that. Instead, he asked me another question. Can be stabilized? Yes, I said. How, he asked. I leaned back slightly in my chair. By reintroducing control points, I said, manually, breaking the loop, slowing the system down where it needs to be slowed. How long, he asked. Depends on how far it's spread, I said. But it's already beyond a quick fix. Another voice jumped in. Someone from client operations. We've got Horizon Logistics on hold right now, they said. They're asking if this is a temporary delay or a systemic issue. Horizon. That wasn't a small account. That was one of our biggest clients. The room shifted again. This wasn't internal anymore. This was exposure. The CEO spoke again. Ethan, he said, why wasn't this raised earlier? That question could have gone a lot of ways. I could have pointed to meetings, emails, decisions. I didn't. It was discussed, I said. But the focus was on simplifying the system. That's not what I asked, he said. I took a breath. It wasn't taken seriously, I said. No emotion, just the truth. No one argued. No one corrected me. Because at that point, the system was speaking louder than any of us. The CEO went quiet again. Then he said, what do you need to stabilize it? That was the moment. The one where everything that had been ignored became necessary. Not optional. Not advisory. Necessary. I looked at the screen, at the layers I had built, at the gaps that had formed. Then I answered. I need control, I said. Simple. Direct. No extra words. The call didn't move for a second, because everyone understood what that meant. Not just technical control. Authority. Decision-making. Trust. The same things that had been taken away. Joseph didn't speak. Kevin didn't speak. The CEO did. You have it, he said. Just like that. 17 years reduced. Then restored. In a single sentence. But by then, it wasn't the same. And it never would be. Once the call ended, everything moved fast. Access was restored. Permissions opened up. Systems that had been restricted during the transition were handed back without questions. No process. No approval chain. Just urgency. I didn't rush. That surprised people. They expected me to jump in, start issuing commands, fixing everything at once. I didn't, because that's how mistakes happen. And this system couldn't take another one. I started where it mattered. The original loop. The point where the wrong decisions were being made. I reintroduced the first control. A simple pause. Just enough to stop the cycle from feeding itself. The effect wasn't immediate. It never is. But within minutes, the growth slowed. Not fixed, just contained. From there, I worked outward, layer by layer. Each system that had been allowed to run freely now needed guidance again. Not permanent, just enough to stabilize. Kevin stayed on the line with me. Quiet first, watching, then asking questions. Not defensive, not trying to prove anything, just trying to understand. Why here? He asked at one point. Because this is where it spreads, I said. He didn't argue. He just listened. Joseph joined briefly, gave a few updates, then stepped back. For the first time since he arrived, he didn't lead. He observed. By mid-morning, the major clients were still affected, but the damage had stopped growing. That was the first win. Containment. Not resolution, but enough to change the conversation. By early afternoon, systems began to realign. Slowly, carefully. No sudden fixes, just steady correction. At 2:30 p.m., Horizon Logistics confirmed their operations were stabilizing. Not perfect, but improving. That bought us time. The rest of the day blurred together. Adjustments, checks, rechecks. By evening, the system was holding again. Not the same as before, but stable. That was enough. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the screen. 17 years of work. Stripped down, tested, then rebuilt in a single day. My phone buzzed. A message from the CEO. Good work. Let's talk tomorrow. I stared at it for a second, then locked the screen, because I already knew what that conversation would be. Recognition, respect, maybe even an offer. Something to fix what had been broken between us. But some things don't reset like systems do. They don't go back to stable just because the immediate problem is solved. The next morning, I walked into the office. Same building, same floor, different feeling. People looked at me differently. Not because I had changed, but because now they understood something they hadn't before. Joseph nodded when he saw me. No smile, no comment, just acknowledgement. Kevin stopped by my desk. Thank you, he said. I nodded. That's how you learn, I said. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Later that day, I sat down with the CEO. Closed office. No interruptions. He got straight to it. We made mistakes, he said. I want to fix that. I listened. Then I said what I needed to say. Not about titles. Not about salary. About structure. Clear roles. Defined control points. No more removing critical safeguards just because they don't look clean on paper. He agreed. Faster than I expected. Because now, he had seen the cost of ignoring them. I also told him something else. I'm not staying in the same position, I said. He looked at me. Not surprised. What are you asking for, he said. Not asking, I said. Deciding. That was the difference. 17 years of quiet work had taught me a lot. But that night taught me something else. If people only value you when things break, then you're not in the right position when things are stable. We worked out the details over the next few days. New structure, new authority, and options. Real ones, not promises. Because by then, I had already started looking outside. Quietly, the same way I built everything else. The company stabilized. The systems improved. The safeguards came back. But the illusion didn't. Everyone knew now how close things had come. And why. As for me, I stopped being invisible. Not because they finally saw me, but because I stopped standing where I couldn't be seen. And the truth is, they didn't lose control because of one bad night. They lost it long before that. The moment they stopped listening to the things that kept everything together. And by the time they heard it again, it was already too late to ignore.